I like this with a little
I
pad.
know, it's yours.
Little pad on it, huh? Look at that.
A nice, comfortable director's chair is always hard to find.
Yeah, you can swipe those two.
El Rey, órale.
Hey, Mark.
Sorry,
El Rey or
slogan.
El
El Rey with a roll.
This is Luis Valdez, and I ride with El Rey.
Here we go. For set. And action.
Welcome to the director's chair. We're here at the Ricardo Montalban Theater. I went to see him, and he was signing a book, and someone whispered in his ear, "Oh, this is Robert Rodriguez, the guy who made El Mariachi." He stood up from his wheelchair and said, "You are the hope. You have to go do it." I'm like thinking, I'm just this kid, and going, "Oh my God, is it on me?" But you really have to take that on and go, "That's right. I mean, he did it."
He saw the whole picture. He saw the whole thing. Not that it wasn't just about actors. We needed everybody. We needed producers. We needed directors. We needed people that understood the business, from the business end of it.
And he was such a great, inspiration to us. That's why we're here at his theater today. I thought it'd be very fitting. A fitting location for you, seeing how you have a background in theater, just to understate things quickly right off the bat. You're also the first Mexican-American film director. You made a big impression on me in my formative filmmaking years, and a lot of filmmakers of all ethnicities and races. And so I want to welcome Luis Valdez.
Thank you, Robert. My pleasure to be here.
The director's chair is about a director talking to another director about the craft, because we all approach it differently. We all come from different backgrounds and different ideologies and methodologies and different disciplines sometimes. And what fascinates me is what draws someone to storytelling and how that fits into their life and becoming their life work. So even though I've followed your career, there's still a lot of things I've always wanted to ask you. From Teatro Campesino to the films which you've done, most notably ones like Zoot Suit.
Put on a zoot suit, makes you feel real root. Ready for dancing, ready for the boogie tonight.
Cisco Kid.
Hey, Pancho. Hey, Cisco. Let's ride!
Cisco Kid was a friend of mine.
La Bamba.
Para bailar la bamba, para bailar la bamba, se necesita una poca de gracia.
You have one of the most fascinating trajectories for a filmmaker and a storyteller. So I want to talk about the early days, because that's kind of what defines us and sets us on our path. How did you begin?
Well, someone begins at any given point, a point of imagination, I think, point of inspiration. The picket line became the stage.
Still claim that there are reds and agitators. Hold on. Among you Mexicans.
From the very first days of El Teatro Campesino, we were out in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley on top of a panel truck, surrounded by the sky, surrounded by the landscape, surrounded by vineyards, and we're doing theater. We're not in a box, You know what I mean? We're in the sphere of the earth. We are out in the open. The workers in the field were scabbing, but our objective was to get them out non-violently. So we had to focus the attention on what we were doing through little devices, the use of signs or, movements. We got signs and hung them, on campesinos and the strikers that said patroncito, that's the grower, or the contratista, the contractor, or the esquirol, the scab, or the huelguista, which is the striker. Those were our four characters.
The point is to take the rancher and to put him on the stage. Put him up on the stage so that other people can see what he's like. Only we'll do the acting.
I know what's good for you. I know what's good for all of you people. That's why I want to tell you right now that there is no strike.
The Teatro gelled as a little company, and then we started going out on tour and coming back, and one day we'd be on the picket line facing all kinds of violence, and another moment we're out there, performing for some very rich supporters, It was a real contradiction, but it gave life to everything that we were doing.
When did it start extending out to visual storytelling with a different medium, films?
In 1969, actually.
Right, wow, so
that
pretty
was I Am
quickly.
Joaquin, based on Coqui Gonzalez's poem. He gave me a mimeograph copy of I Am Joaquin, and I looked at this and I said, we can stage this.
I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion.
We did it with live music. I did the narrative. We did the slides to back it up. And then I had a friend who bought a 16mm Bolex camera. And he said, why don't we film it? Why don't we film the slideshow? So we made our first film. He hawked a car, I think, and it got $5,000, and we shot it in a kitchen in Fresno. It was 22 minutes long, and it was the first Chicano film. I mean, that dealt with really the movement and the ideas of the political ideas of the 1960s.
What do you think they were reacting to mostly with seeing themselves on the screen for the first time?
Well, I hope that they were reacting to, one, the power of the imagery. That it was visual, very still is. The narrative and the musical soundtrack that we created for it, all original music, was powerful also, done collectively within the teatro. I had my narrative, and this became really a revelation. The moment that we showed it for the first time was like an explosion, like a silent explosion. I could hear people's hearts.
Wow.
It was an exciting moment that I said, film is accessible to us. We can make films. The Pachuco idea was like first and foremost because of the Sleepy Lagoon case in which 22 young Chicanos were put on mass trial. That seemed to me sensational miscarriage of justice. We had gang fights, and it took Eddie Olmos in costume to go in there and separate them, as in Pachuco. Right.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
How did Zoot Suit, the play, come about? I'm going to explain that. I'm going to kind of go over the play first before we move into the film adaptation, which is its own beast and wonderful creation.
I think it was a surprise for everybody involved. I was commissioned by the Mark Taper Forum, the Center Theater Group in LA, Gordon Davidson. We had this conversation about the new Theater for Now series that they were starting, and they needed local playwrights, and so I was the first one out of the gate. And the Pachuco idea was like first and foremost. It was there, sitting there, you know, on the mantle because of the Sleepy Lagoon case. The play is based on an actual historical event, you know, the Sleepy Lagoon case of 1942, followed by the Zoot Suit riots of 1943 here in the city of Los Angeles. And it's not just LA history, it's also American history because it's World War II. And there are a lot of tensions, you know, a lot of war hysteria. And yet here's this cultural phenomenon coming out of the Depression, which is the big band sound, jitterbug, swing music, and the Zoot Suit, you know, that allowed young men to be able to dance on the floor wearing the Zoot Suit. The women had short skirts, very sexy, very stylish, very cool. Bonnaroo, as they used to say. But the thing is that it also had other consequences in society and other repercussions because a lot of people didn't like it. They considered it to be criminal, you know, borderline criminal. And that came to a head here in Los Angeles against the Pachucos, the Mexican Americans that were wearing Zoot Suits. And they were called marihuanos, you know, they were supposed to be violent. And even though probably the most violent instrument available at that time was a zip gun, you know. But the thing is that there was really ostracism happening, and because of the war, there was a lot of crackdown. Now that led to the Sleepy Lagoon case in which 22 young Chicanos were put on mass trial and condemned for the mysterious death of one other Chicano. 12 of them being sentenced to go to San Quentin, 4 of them for life. That seemed to me sensational miscarriage of justice. And I discovered when I began to investigate this that there was still a wound there in the community. You know, the collective being, the social being, reacts slower. And so if something happens 70 years ago, it's still there, you know, today. And that was the case with LA. So I set out to help that wound, in a sense. I felt that. When I was commissioned to do the play, they said, you can have 12 characters. And I said, 12 characters? Then they're all the Pachucos, or there's no judge, there are no cops. So I had to really condense the gang into 4 characters. So the composites really reflected the 22 guys, but the 12 particularly that went to San Quentin. And used the other 8 characters to tell the story. Kind of spread it around a little bit to get George, you know, the lawyer, and to get the family. It was a personal undertaking for me. It got me really involved with the individuals involved. And so the play was a real personal statement in a way. I wanted to deal with the Pachuco and who the Pachuco had been. I'm old enough to remember the Pachucos in the 1940s. I had a cousin who was a full-fledged Pachuco as a teenager, and he had a running partner whose name was Cici, and they used to hang in Delano, California, you know, in the valley. And my cousin unfortunately died of violent Pachuco's death in 1955, 17 knife wounds to the chest. Cici survived. So when I was going back to join the United Farm Workers struggle, I told my mom I'm going to Delano, and she says, "Oh, you're going to go work with Cici." And I said, "Cici, is that vato still around?" And she says, "Mijo, don't you know who Cici is? He's Cesar Chavez."
Oh, wow.
So Cesar was a Pachuco, and my cousin Billy was a Pachuco, and I was a little
You
six-year-old
had a
kid.
connection with him back
To
then.
me, they seemed like, you know, giants. So when I wrote El Pachuco as a character in the play, I was referring back to that childhood vision, right?
Right.
To me, they look like heroes. The Pachuco was part of my personal experience, and I had to use my imagination in order to make it public, to make it epic.
And the way Eddie almost portrayed it, I mean,
Eddie was
what
tremendous.
a performance. I mean, you know, what a breakout performance, made him a star.
I had been looking for a Pachuco. My brother Daniel, who played the alter ego, was Henry Reina. He was with me in the whole process of casting, and we couldn't find a Pachuco. He ran into Eddie Olmos in the corridors of the Mark Taper Forum. We were holding our auditions, and he didn't even know auditions were happening, you know?
Right.
And so he said, "Are you here for the audition?" He said, "For what?" You know? So he auditioned him, and it turns out the face, the voice, was just right.
Just physically, even how he carried himself, the power of the Pachuco. How did you get that performance from him?
In the process of the rehearsing, it wasn't there immediately.
Right.
He was trying to figure out how to do this, and what got it for him was finally that I was talking about certain stances, and he said isometrics. He says, I do isometrics. So let me use some and I said, yeah, that's it. And so then he assumed the stance, and the Pachuco started to come together after that.
And you wrote the play in 77 or 78, it came out. And then it hit. It was a huge hit. It was probably the biggest, longest running Hispanic play in LA history was Zoot Suit. Quentin tells me that was the place to be, was going to see Zoot Suit.
What really surprised people is that as soon as it was announced, a little half paragraph in the LA Times, all the tickets sold out for the first run. It was a 2-week run, New Theater for Now, and before it even opened, before it was written, they'd sold out. And later, when it was scheduled for the main season, 8-week run, it sold out before it opened. And so that impressed some people. They said, "What's going on here?" And what it was, I think, it's the pressure from the LA community itself to see something that dealt with this subject, right? I think that it revealed that there was this tremendous potential in not just this subject, but also in the Latino audience. Half the audience was Latino.
Right.
Which is a phenomenon, because almost 500,000 people saw the play, you know, over the 11 months that it was on stage. We had gang fights. We had 2 rival gangs show up for one show. And it took Eddie Olmos in costume to go in there and separate them, as in Pachuco, right?
Stop him with
And
that
they
stuff,
paid
I'm saying.
attention to him, you know, when he came out as in Pachuco. And we stopped, not because we ran out of audience, but kind of to freshen up. And the movie came out of that period. I'm saying, how can we take it on tour? There's no mechanism across country, but a film can go, so we focused on a film. It was my first time out, man. I tried to go to sleep, and I couldn't. But when I finally fell asleep, I dreamt that there were 3 cameras filming me sleeping. I had a gun put to my head at one time out on the picket line. Your sphincter puckers, you know, you can whistle Dixie, you know, real quick.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
How soon after the run in LA did you go make the film?
Actually, I was offered $500,000 for the rights before we opened on Broadway. They were ready to pay, but I said, well, what about the screenplay? Who's going to direct, right? And they said, well, we'll give you one crack at the screenplay, but it's probably going to get somebody else to do it, you know. And I said, well, what about the direction? He said, well, there's no choice. You're not a director. There's no way. So here it is, $500,000, take it or leave it, right? So I left it. I said, I'm not interested. I mean, I'm a farm worker, you know what I mean? I'm a migrant farm worker, and I was turning down more money than my dad ever made in his life, I think, you know, $500,000. But what I wanted was the freedom to do my own movie. You know, I wanted that. This is my work, so I didn't sell it.
Yeah.
Eventually I had to settle for $1 million budget overall. But it was worth it, you know? It was worth it to me to put my stake in the ground and say, I'm here. This is me. This is who I am.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mono you're about to see is a construct of fact and fantasy. But relax, weigh the facts, and enjoy the pretense.
Okay, so now it's time to put on the zoot suit.
Put on the zoot suit.
And live the myth. I've seen it way too many times, right?
Pues órale!
Pues órale!
Actually, my first concept of Zoot Suit, the movie, was a lot like Batman.
Kill the Pachuco bastard! Come on, Suitor. You think you're more important than the wars? Let's see if you got any balls in those funny
But I wanted the Pachuca up on top of skyscrapers, man. I wanted this character that could fly through the air, you know what I mean? I wanted a magical character. In other words, I wanted a Chicano superhero.
like an animal. Monkey, a monkey.
It was a baptism by fire, I'll admit. It was my first 35mm film,
Lot
you
to
know,
take on.
a 13-day schedule. So
You shot in 13 days.
13 days, man.
Wow.
There was no time to lose. And some of that stuff we just grabbed, believe me. I did things that no movie director would do consciously, you know, deliberately, but we had no choice. We had to grab shots, right?
Yeah.
And we were very fortunate. We got away with certain things.
Some of it I have questions about the movie, like some of the, when the headlights go across the
choices?
audience to show them driving around, it's like, okay, that's a great creative money-saving device, but I have an idea that if you had more money, you probably would have still done it the same way. Because it's just a cool idea. It's like, yeah, why show the cars travel? You see that all the time. Let's see the headlights go across. It's so creative. I was just wondering, how eager were you to get behind the camera finally?
To be making a feature film was a new experience, and it was a shock to the entire system. I remember the first night after my first day of shooting, I tried to go to sleep and I couldn't. I mean, it was, when I finally fell asleep, I dreamt that I was in bed and there were 3 cameras filming me sleeping. One was at the foot of the bed and these 2 were doing the side, and I was sleeping. But I loved it. I loved the process. I loved the idea of taking control of the imagery through the lens. And I think that's the key to direction, that you've got to be able to edit your own film in your mind before you get there, you know, or at least put up enough possibilities for later editing through that same imaginary process, you know, to see it ahead of time.
What's amazing about your accomplishment is that you're theater trained, so you're allowing the audience to pick its shots. And now suddenly you're completely taking the reins of that and showing them exactly what you want to see and setting up some very cinematic, very bold shots. It's a really great solution because, yeah, a studio executive would watch the play and say, can you just give us that? We love that. Just film that with 3 cameras, and instead, you gave them that and something new.
Cada sábado en la noche yo me voy a borlotear con mi linda pachucona, las caderas a menear. Ella le hace muy de aquella.
People are often tempted to put video cameras up and shoot a play. I said, you really just can't do it, you know, trochi-mochi. You can't do it, you know, by accident. You've got to plan these shots. You've got to be very careful where you put your camera. You got to respect the camera. The camera's your eye, you know. You don't poke yourself in the eye and expect to see better.
Music was always a part of your theatrical group. So how did you approach the music in the movie? You had like Lalo Guerrero and stuff. Was this music that was already in the play and then you adapted it over?
I think in some ways the use of music in my work comes from a couple of elements. One is music was the first point of entry or point of escape, you know, for a lot of my relatives. My uncle was a music maker. There's Lalo Guerrero, who was actually my dad's cousin. You know. He was the most successful guy in the whole family, you know. There's Lalo, he's on the radio, he's putting records out. So music was really an important escape factor. Also, as a kid, watching Mexican movies, it seemed to me every Mexican movie had singers in it. You know, the Rancheras and Jorge Negrete and Pedro Infante, they all sang.
They always brought out the
guitar. You know, Luis Aguilar, you know, Tony Aguilar, they all sang. And that's the Mexican side of me. And it seemed to me that that's the most natural thing that can be. And so when I started putting together Teatro Campesino, the music became an essential part of what we were doing anyway. The corridos, the ballads that dealt with the movement. And we used to sing these at the meeting. And we discovered that music on the picket line was one of the ways that you could dispel fear. If you are really confronting violence, and then we had some real cases I had a gun put to my head at one time out on the picket line. Your sphincter puckers, you know, you can whistle Dixie, you know, real quick. But the thing is that if you're singing, it kind of dispels that and also breaks the tension. It does something different. So I respect music for all of its power, but I respect it on the stage too, because I think it's like water. It really helps to solve a lot of problems. So I use a lot of music. I use it as score, I use it as underscore. And it's not just music as we understand it, but also the music of sound effects, the music of traffic, the music of voices.
28. 24. 5. 27. Robert. 24. 5.
I use the ear a lot in order to get me from here to there in terms of action. And it's in my plays as well as in my films. That's a very conscious choice.
How did you figure out a way to use the pachuco in a mythical way? When
I started to put together Zoot Suit the play, I needed a master of ceremonies that could serve as my editing device. So I could stop action. I could give only as much action as I needed and then move on.
Let's go to gore.
I figured, who are the pachucos mythologically?
Right.
They're people that do the streets at night. You know, you don't see the pachucos out in broad daylight. You know, at noon, you see them at midnight. And so he assumed another mythical dimension for me in terms of the Aztec gods. And I put him in the colors of black and red because he's Tezcatlipoca. He is the dean of the school now. He's the lord of the night. Now, I'm not laying it on too heavily in the sense that this mythology that I wanted to represent, it just came out.
Yeah.
It came out organically out of the material.
Get up and escape, Henry. Leave reality behind. Con tus buenas garras, voy Chamberlain. Escape through the barrio streets of your mind.
So Zoot Suit, in this sense, is an actualization, a dramatization of this very fact. Henry Reina sees himself as El Pachuco. And yet El Pachuco is a greater consciousness that can look back and see his frailties. And so you have this constant reflection happening. Those two realities exist within every one of us. Each of us has an alter ego, or a super ego, some would say. That is your authority figure that lives inside you. And the process of becoming an adult is what they call individuation in psychological circles, where you finally take command of your own self-image. And in a sense, that's what Hank Reina does in Zoot Suit. Is when he goes and tells the Pachuco to f*** off, and he's in solitary.
Yeah.
It's when he finally takes command of himself.
You're me. My worst enemy. And my best friend. Myself. So get lost. Get lost!
It's wonderfully done. That's such a great, and then one of Daniel's best scenes, that powerful scene there in solitary. And then you quickly turn it and Del Pachuco turns and the audience is behind him.
Pues don't take the pinchy play so seriously, Jesus.
Hey, don't take it so seriously.
Don't take the pinchy play so seriously.
So great.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a great moment. But yeah, he disappears and comes back.
The Pachuco disappears at that point. In the movie, he becomes a victim of the Sleepy Lagoon riots. But then he reappears at the end of the movie in the white suit. Now he's coming back, not as Tezcatlipoca, the smoke mirror, but as Quetzalcoatl, okay, the feathered serpent,
right.
The enlightened being, who is now present in Hank's life as a higher consciousness. Now, this is all very symbolic. People may or may not read this completely the way I have scripted it. But I think they kind of see it on another level, a subliminal psychological level.
Yeah,
that
no, it totally
there's
works.
truth in this, right? To me, mythology is not fakery. Mythology are the underpinnings of reality. The atom is a myth. The atom, no one can see atoms. They're mythological. But they're there. We count on them being there in order to understand our universe. In that way, mythology is really what's underneath the surface of all our lives and our minds. And it's what gives dimension to Zoot Suit as a story, because it's not just about gang members. Gang members are human too. Gang members are profound.
Whose pinchy side are you on anyway?
the side of the heroes and the fools, Hank. Which one are you?
We looked out the window and there were some mariachis, and my brother and I looked at each other and we simultaneously said, La Bamba. Nobody that looked like my brother, very dark and Indian looking, could have made it as a rock and roll artist.
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
Tell me about La Bamba. How did that come about?
We were about to open on Broadway with Zoot Suit. And I went into my brother's dressing room and kind of patting ourselves on the back, me and my brother, you know, for having come all the way to Broadway and say, okay, we've done the 40s, now we have to do the 50s. I said, you know, looking at the future, saying we have to come back and do a 50s musical. But what can we do? And at that moment, we heard music coming from down below. And we looked out the window and there were some mariachis and they were playing full blast. The mariachis that had been sent by the President of Mexico to serenade us on our Broadway opening. And my brother and I looked at each other and we simultaneously said, La Bamba.
All our dreams are gonna come true, Moose. I just know it.
It's my signature calling card. I can go anywhere with it.
And it's
you
an
know?
amazing film. I mean,
It's good to have one
time.
of those, you know?
Yeah. And especially just how much it meant to everybody to see a movie that had a Spanish title, that had a Spanish song, that had so many Hispanic actors, that was completely mainstream.
It went quickly, man. You know, I've had other projects that hold on for 10 years.
Some go fast, some go slow.
But this thing were rolled over in 1 year. It was
Wow.
amazing. Green lights, green lights, green lights. I think it's part of the magical momentum of the project. When a project is really underway and it's going to work, it's for other forces that are greater than you.
Right.
It's not you, it's the condition around you, you know, that's propelling this thing forward. The music was a real experience for me, working with Carlos Santana at Paramount Studios, you know, improvising a lot of the riffs.
Oh, man, my hair just went up my arm. Imagine sitting there watching Carlos Santana score your movie and feeling it.
Yeah.
I'm feeling purple. And did you know that song was going to have a resurgence like that? Because you shot it that way.
There's a bit of a rattlesnake.
You hold off on unveiling his rock version of La Bamba. And when he comes on, it's a huge movie moment.
Para bailar la bamba, para bailar la bamba, yo necesito.
Well, La Bamba had to be the pivot, you know, not just of Richie's career, but the pivot in the sense of the movie. And of course, Lou Diamond Phillips did all the lip syncing, but David Hidalgo did all the real singing. The Lobos did a scratch track. When we finally cut the whole thing together, I wasn't satisfied with the version that they had recorded as a scratch track, and I said, it needs more cake, guys. You gotta go and do it again, you know. Again, now you gotta match Richie, right? This time they kicked ass, man. They really knocked it out of the park.
And that's the song.
And that's why they had to do that. They realized then, seeing the cut, okay, this is the role that it's playing.
You have a great eye for casting. You know, I've always found you discovered a lot of up-and-coming Hispanic, Latino talent. Where did you get your cast?
Isai Morales we found right away. And I said, whoa,
fantastic.
this guy has got to be Bob. He's Bob. And even Connie, the mother, said, he looks like Bob, you know? He really looks like Bob. The trouble was really in finding a Richie. That was a real challenge. But what's interesting, and a lot of people don't know this, is that originally my brother Danny was going to play Richie Valens. But in truth, in 1958, nobody that looked like my brother, very dark and Indian looking, could have made it as a rock and roll artist. So I was looking for somebody that could kind of represent that, you know, and so I saw a lot of Latinos, some too young, some too old. I saw 600 guys. I saw 300 here, another 300 in New York. And out of desperation, we said, well, let's send some casting people over to Texas, you know. And in Dallas, they ran into Lou Diamond Phillips. He was trying out for Bob, you know, he was trying to be real tough. And then I said, no, I'll tell you, have him do Richie. Let him do Richie. And so he did Richie, and that grit that he had as when he was trying to do Bob came out in a very different way. He had this very interesting look about him. You couldn't really place him, you know? And so I said, that's it, let's go with this guy.
I'm gonna be a star.
Some people, they say, why didn't you cast a Latino, you know? Or even more surreptitiously, they say, why did you put a Filipino in there, man, you know? And I knew we were going into a minefield of sorts. But I decided, hey, listen, it's the play's the thing, you know what I mean?
You know what, Bubbo? I've always believed I was gonna die in a plane crash.
Richie, that's a hell of a thing to say while we're still in the air.
I think that Lou Diamond Phillips did a phenomenal job. We even considered changing his name, believe it or not.
Right.
Could he become Luis Diamantes?
Yeah.
you know?
No, it makes sense. It makes sense
because that would eliminate some of that criticism, right? But I can't let the politics interfere with the artistry. And besides, we had Isai Morales. I mean, he can't any browner than Isai, but he's a handsome brown guy, you know what I mean?
And you bring up so many people in a production like that.
Elizabeth Peña.
What a talent. And yeah, we first discovered her in actually La Bamba.
Rosie, this is my brother Bob.
Elizabeth Peña was a pure spirit.
Estás perdiendo el tiempo pensando, pensando.
She was a born performer. She easily took direction, but she didn't need much. She saw the character and gave you the moment, the moments that you needed.
You son of a bitch!
I mean, she had a passion for life that came out in her acting. If you wanted her to be enraged, she could do it. If you wanted her to be loving, she could. She wanted to be funny, she could do that too. And I love that. I love that when somebody can mix the sweet and sour. Someone can mix the comedy and the tragedy and knows how they're connected. Because laughter and tears come from the same source.
Showed a very strong career for a female and Hispanic, playing sometimes colorblind roles. You know, people would go to her for her strength and resilience.
Congratulations, son.
She's part of our show, Matador. She will be missed. We have to open up the doors for others as well, because there's so few of us who break in. And if you break in, you have to break in and bring extra sledgehammers. You know?
Here we go. Percent. Here we go. Percent. And action.
So my favorite segments, this is called Questions from Other Directors. Joe Menendez. He's a young director that worked with me this last season from Dusk Till Dawn, the television series we have on El Rey. He said that he'd love to hear you talk about work versus passion. Not sure if that's a good question, but I wonder if Mr. Valdez has ever looked at directing as just a job.
I think that if as a filmmaker, if you want to do a film, as you well know, it involves so much work and so much attention that you better love it. You better love what you're doing, or don't even attempt it, because the work will not be what it should be.
It'll feel like work, probably, for the first time, instead of...
It becomes a job. Yeah. That's the problem. Now, I've had projects that I've had to fight for over a long, long period. My wife and I wrote a Frida script years ago, and we ran into casting difficulties. They didn't want to cast a Latina because there was no Latina star. And so, given the alternatives that they were giving me, I had to walk away. And I walked into another project. It was the Cisco Kid. Actually, I came in.
Who are you?
Where's he's the Cisco Kid?
Yeah, I'm here with the meanest bunch of Texas outlaws you've ever seen.
Gringos.
The movies kind of touch the same themes, and so I said, I can do this, you know? I really got into it, working in Mexico and doing that, doing a Western. That was fun.
What is your name, son?
My name is Francisco Ramon Sanchez Aguilar y Solares.
Who can remember all that?
When I finally got around to Cisco Kid, I realized that I was really relating to all the Westerns that I'd ever seen as a kid. And then I had an opportunity now to actually do a Western, which is amazing. My only regret was that I didn't start early enough to really take it all the way that I wanted to go. I wanted to make it a satire of not only Cisco, but of the whole Western. I wanted to really work it. Without the Chicano, without the Mexican, there is no Western movie. You know, there is no Western culture as such. And I think that it is important for everybody in the world to know that, to know what the what the polarities are, you know, in this world.
Yeah.
And again, the Latinos have to understand we have to fight these things, right?
We have to go beyond. We can't just come here and do our one part and be a director or whatever we want for ourselves. We have to open up the doors for others as well, because there's so few of us who break in. And if you break in, you have to break in and bring extra sledgehammers. You know, let everybody else in. Ricardo Montalban, you know, who I got to work with finally after being a great admirer of his my whole life. And I worked with him in the Spy Kids series. What a fantastic man he was, not just for what he did and as a beacon of Latino talent in Hollywood, but behind the scenes, you know, also with the cause, also with Nosotros.
This theater is named in his honor because he deserved this honor, you know, and what he did with Nosotros was to advance the whole field for everyone. He was a real caballero, you know, he was a real gentleman. And I think that he expressed that by his social activism, his leadership in Nosotros and the idea that nosotros, you know, that we had to work together in order to better our condition. I really appreciated his worldwide knowledge of where he was and how he got here. I mean, he was from Mexico, there's no question about that. But, and he encountered all kinds of resistances early on in the 1940s. But I don't think that, you know, that particular generation really saw themselves as apart from the mainstream. They saw the mainstream and they didn't see themselves as segregated from it.
Right.
They just saw the need to just flow, you know, flow in. Ricardo, you know, played Mr. Rourke, right, on Fantasy Island for so many years.
I am Mr. Rourke, your host. Welcome to Fantasy Island.
That wasn't a Latino character. He played the great Khan in the Star Trek movie. And I was so happy to see that.
From hell's heart, I stab at thee.
I love his last name anyway, Montalban, you know, that evokes Montalban, you know, in Oaxaca. They're one of the civilizational centers of pre-Columbian America, you know, and I don't know what the link was. I should have asked him at some point. I would say, where did you get this name? It's a lovely name, you know. He's on another dimension also, doing whatever he needs to do, you know, and he left his vibration here for us to inspire.
Eduardo Sanchez, he directed Blair Witch Project. He wrote, I fucking love La Bamba. But I'd really like to know why he stopped making movies.
I'm not just a filmmaker. I'm also a theater director. I'm also head of my own company. We're all going to celebrate our 50th anniversary. And the other two is I'm also a university professor. And I'm an author. And, you know, I had I'm a labor organizer. I've had all these different roles to play, and they all are part of my life, you know. And I'm just beginning again, actually. This is the third act, you know what I'm saying? I'm 74 now. But I don't feel like my life is behind me. There's still quite a chunk ahead of me in that sense in terms of the work. And I kind of love the idea that things are just starting. And we did that in the Chicano movement when it was just getting started and it was the excitement of something just getting born, you know? And it was that way with the theater and it's that way with movies that I've done. And I keep looking for that in everything that I do. Where's it being reborn? Where is the rebirth here? It's very empowering in every direction.
Yeah.
But the fact is that if you can relate to the river of humanity and the generations as they come and go, you're in a good place. You know?
Guillermo del Toro, terrific Mexican film director. We did an episode with him here recently. He said, I actually studied his life and his films back in Mexico. He said, Mr. Valdez, his question is, Mr. Valdez, you were an important example of integrity and vision for my generation. Do you feel that us, as Latin filmmakers, have that added responsibility to open new roads for the upcoming filmmakers?
I think we absolutely have that responsibility. I think that we need to stand for something in that regard. For me, in a way, my dad actually was my inspiration. He worked in a movie called Cimarron, which won the Best Picture Award back in the 30s. They were doing the Oklahoma land rush in the San Joaquin Valley. They hired all these mule drivers. He was like a migrant farm worker at the time, but he knew how to handle mules. So he was among them. For the rest of his life, he talked about being in a movie and how the catering was real good, how well they ate. So really, from that early age, I said, okay, my dad was in a movie, I can be in a movie. So, you know, again, the empowerment that comes through parents is probably very basic. But actually, I got inspired With the theater, by the theater, when I was in the first grade. There was a little paper bag that had my lunch in it, and my teacher took it one day, and she turned it into a mask using one of the secrets of the universe, which is paper mache, and I discovered that. I got cast in my first role, and I was excited, man, really just blown out by the possibility I was going to appear on the stage before the world. Wow. But then the week of the presentation, we were evicted from this labor camp. We were migrant farm workers, so we were there very briefly. We were there 1 month, as it turned out, and I was never in the play, so that left a big hole in my chest. And that left me with, 1, the secret of paper mache, and 2, the desire to do theater, and 3, the anger that we had been evicted from this labor camp. So roughly 20 years later, I went to Cesar Chavez and pitched him an idea of a theater by 4 and about farm workers, you know.
Yeah, you created your own theater movement on the picket lines. What was your pitch to him? Did you go to him and say, I know we're doing this strike, but we need a theater right here?
The first thing he said to me was, you know, there's no money to do theater in Delano. There are no actors. He says, there's no stage. There isn't any time to rehearse. We're on a picket line day and night. You still want to take a crack at it? And I said, absolutely, Cesar. What an opportunity. What I was tapping into was the spirit of this movement. For me, I mean, American theater and American film are not nearly as political as they should be. We should be making statements directly about our way of life and what's to be lost here.
Senor, please, eh? No, espérate, let's talk English, eh? Por favor. No, we're in America, let's talk English.
A lot has happened in 50 years, but the need actually is still there. I still hear the same complaints, you know, people that are ashamed of their origins, they're ashamed of who they are, they know nothing of their history, their glorious history. It's an element that is there in our work, I think, because we are Mexican Americans, but the emphasis there is on our American identity in a continental sense, that our roots go back 10,000 years into the mythology of our ancient American ancestors, and it appears in some of our films. And so if anything that I do can speak truth to somebody, I'm grateful that that might serve as an example.
There's other ways to end this story.
This is Luis Valdez. We're very privileged to have him here with us in the Ricardo Montalban Theater on the El Rey Network for the Director's Chair. Thank you, senor.
Thank you, Robert. It's my pleasure and my honor to see you here.
Great to finally talk with you.
Orale.